now it's time for viewer mail, and we have mail.
We have mail?
Yes,
Good.
we do.
If you have questions, send them to Doug@riskandrewardtv.org. I'd be happy to answer your questions. What do we have this week?
This is from Fred in Las Vegas.
Thank you, Fred.
He writes, should I have a margin account? Why or why not?
Excellent question. I don't know whether you should have a margin account yet or not, Fred, because as with most every question, it depends.
Well, what is margin anyway?
Thank you for
in
asking.
This circumstance?
In this circumstance, exactly, because we just talked about margin. It's a boundary or a frontier, and going beyond it is additional. In this case, margin is the additional money that you can borrow from your brokerage and buy more securities with.
So basically it's debt.
Basically, a margin account allows you to borrow money, and you're going to borrow money, it's basically debt. So that's exactly. So you should think of your margin account exactly the same way you think of debt. And what's debt, Brenda?
Debt is leverage.
That's exactly right. Debt is leverage. So here's how it works with a margin account. Without margin and with margin, we have, let's say, $100 in each, and then we have margin of 0 without margin, and we can borrow, let's say, we just borrow $50 in the margin account. We could borrow more, depends on what the margin requirements can be different for different types of accounts and so on. I'm just using 50 as an example of how much you might want to borrow. So you borrow 50, so now you have a total of 150. This is the total. So you have 100 in one account, you have 150 in securities in the other account. Well, what happens if it goes up 10%? So we have 110 in one, and we have 165 in the other. Everybody clear on that? That's pretty straightforward. What if it goes down 10%? We have 90 in one, and we have 135. I have to think real quick. 135 in the other. So it magnifies, debt magnifies the result of whatever you invested. So if it goes up, you win more, and if it goes down, you lose more. So in this case, you started with 150, you've got to pay the 50 back, you end up with 115, and in this case, you had 135, you've got to pay the 50 back, and you end up with 85. So instead of having either 90 or 110, now you have 115 or 85, so the margin magnifies the result.
Now, what about silver contracts and margin?
Well, silver got pummeled because a lot of people bought silver on margin, and the margin requirements, if they say you can borrow, say, a max of $50 on this $100 example here, and that's your maximum, well, if you have a change in the rules and say you can only borrow $30 per 100, which isn't, likely to happen in stocks, but it did happen in silver. In fact, the CME has raised the margin requirements of silver futures 5 times in the past 15 days.
Wow, no wonder why silver is plummeting.
That's right. So think of margin in response to your house, right? So if you put a 20% down payment on your house, and you bought a house, and a house is, of course, illiquid compared to the silver futures market, but if you put 20% down on your house, and you bought a $100,000 house, 20% down, and then all of a sudden the bank came along and said, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we've changed. We went 30%
we went
down.
30% down.
Or 40% down.
So come up with another 10%. Or come up with another 20%.
Yeah, I don't have that.
I don't have it. So the only way you do it is sell your house. Well, in this case, they raised them 5 times in 15 days, which...
People are selling silver.
That's right. People have to start selling silver. So they had to sell silver to cover their margins. And then when the market starts going down, if they're long, margin obviously hurts them even worse. So it escalates. So you can see how you can get a big, sharp cutting of the knife fall off because they used margin. Margin requirements change. They have to come up with more capital. That can only last a little while.
And they only have a few days to pay off their...
They have to come up with it because the accounts close daily. So you've got a margin call. And they're called margin calls. It's not a good thing.
And they do it for you.
Yeah.
They clear it.
Right. Oh, they did. They'll sell your positions to clear your account. So in answer to your question, Fred, if you're a gambler and you like increasing your odds, a margin account is one way to do that. If you want to be a little safer, then you probably wouldn't use debt or margin to magnify your gains or losses.
And what's your takeaway?
So the takeaway is margin is brokerage account. The margin in a brokerage account is debt, and debt is leverage. It magnifies the result of your investment. If you win bigger. If you lose bigger. So think of it as a two-edged sword. It can cut both ways.